Hey there, I'm Dee. Welcome back. Tonight, I'll guide you through two very different, deeply disturbing stories, both soaked in violence, both quiet in the way they haunt a town afterward. And in the background, I'm lighting a candle, playing some games of Solitaire, and maybe doodling and coloring. So if this combination of sounds and visuals somehow helps you relax and fall asleep, don't forget to like the video, leave a little or long comment, and subscribe to my channel. Also, my YouTube channel is not monetized, so it would greatly help me if you checked out my Patreon at patreon.com/WhisperedTrueCrime. Thank you so much to all my patrons. You guys have literally changed my life. Alright now, if you're ready to listen to some madness being whispered, let's begin. Actually, let's begin in a border town where ritual and narcotics bled together into one terrible night. Then we cross back in time to a small Midwestern American city, to a house where cruelty became routine and public silence grew like dirty mold. Both stories of tonight raise the same usual questions in true crime. How did ordinary life let this happen, How does one day just turn so horrible? And that's what we'll explore. Hopefully try. Stay with me. Part 1. Mark Kilroy. Spring break 1989. A ritual that shattered a town. Mark James Kilroy was a university student, just 20 years old, traveling with friends during spring break. He had plans like the others his age, the usual college stuff. Beaches, midnight laughs, the kind of reckless freedom that comes only at those ages. Matamoros, Tamaulipas, across the border from South Texas, was a popular spring destination for this crowd. The bars in the area were crowded. Cheap drinks and the kind of anonymity young people sometimes look for, especially during spring break in America. That anonymity is what made the small pocket of the town vulnerable that night. And that night, March 14, 1989, Kilroy didn't come back to the group. At first, there was normal amount of worry. Just delayed texts, some missed check-ins. But when he failed to contact friends for days, his absence became a missing person case. His family raised the alarm. From the US across the border, and an investigation began that would push across state lines and into dark rural ranch land outside Matamoros. Reporters soon arrived. Authorities followed leads, and unfortunately, what they discovered eventually is nightmarish. Investigators traced Kilroy's last known movements to a cluster of clubs and a small bar district. They interviewed witnesses, followed taxi drivers' accounts, and pursued a trail that ended at a ranch used by a drug trafficking cell. Once police reached the ranch, the scene shifted from missing person to that of ritualistic homicide. Local testimony and forensic work indicated that Kilroy had been abducted and taken to a private property where a group engaged in ritualistic practices tied to narcotics, trafficking, and a violent belief in protection through sacrifice. How horrifying. The ranch revealed the remains of other victims and evidence of repeated sacrificial acts. Now let's see what the forensics showed. This is the piece that chills everyone. Investigators found evidence that Kilroy was murdered in a ritualistic manner. Forensic examinations reports detailed that his skull had been struck and that he had been dismembered. One of the most shocking details reported is that the brain was removed. According to many accounts in this investigation, and the said brain had been boiled in a pot, apparently as part of a ritual. Yikes. These acts were not isolated. They fit a pattern of narcotics-linked ritual killings in that region at the time, where those involved believed human sacrifice would bind supernatural protection to their smuggling operations. How freaking crazy is that? That it goes on in modern life. A lot of things goes on that you wouldn't believe. The forensics, bones, cut marks, and the traces of boiling paint a picture of a killing that was both instrumental and, of course, ceremonial. The people arrested were connected to drug trafficking and to local rituals, mixing folk beliefs, satanic imagery, and an organized desire to intimidate. Well, is it intimidation if you murder someone? They're gone. How crazy is that this area was somewhere that these young people were going to? Didn't any travel agency or public notice was put out to be like, maybe don't cross border into these questionable cities in Mexico, where we've heard of these crazy gang rituals? How did this even happen? I mean, I'm sure it was a beautiful and cheap place to party, but to what? At what cost? The people arrested, as I said, they were doing it with satanic imagery and what else did I want to say? Investigators and journalists pieced together confessions and statements indicating that the violence was intended to be sacrificial. A grotesque attempt to secure success and protection in criminal enterprise. Members involved described ceremonies that combined Christian imagery with pre-Hispanic and modern occult rituals. Creepy as heck. The overlap between narco-violence and ritual provided both a motive and a method. Brutality personality became a means of control, a terrifying demonstration both to their rivals and to the frightened townspeople who sometimes suspected, and of course, fearing for their lives, sometimes ignored the violence. Over time, arrests, trials, and convictions followed. The town of Matamoros was thrust into an international media storm, and the case led to scrutiny of cross-border crime networks as well as the occult elements. Mark Kilroy's parents and other people affected fought for answers and for the dignity of truth. The case remains referenced as an example of how narcotics trafficking can mutate into ritualized cruelty. A reminder of how evil can wear the quiet face of organized crime in a city where college kids go party on spring break. That's such a crazy case. I've never heard of it before. It's just, I can't even imagine how can a human mind be believing in that sort of thing and go as far as attempt it. Like, how do you pay no respect to human life, so much so that you use it for a quote-unquote ritualistic thing? What if you're wrong? Not that if you're right it makes it good, but I'm just saying, how do you so arrogant to go ahead with this and take these human lives so without regret? How grotesque. But it is time to get into the part 2, the second story. Story of Sylvia Likens, someone named Panis Swiski, PaniszeWski, for a small fee, which is a common and not unusual arrangement in that era. Oh, did I mention where this story is from? Sylvia was from Indiana, so this story happened there, as I said, in 1965. Unfortunately, at the time, these poor families did this. A common and not unusual arrangement. A boarding agreement that would usually become a nightmare. Gertrude Paniszewiski, the man that these children were sold to, already was troubled and was known to have a lot of relations with women, and he often took girls in. In time, what began as ordinary discipline turned into a sadistically orchestrated nightmare. For months, neighbors occasionally heard commotion. Doors slamming, low cries, and children playing. Some neighbors later said they were aware that the household had problems. In October 1965, the sounds became worse. On October 25th and 26th, after a failed escape attempt and escalating beatings, Sylvia's condition deteriorated drastically. When the police finally recovered her body, she was in a state that investigators and later journalists called the most diabolical case they had ever seen. The body showed not only acute injuries, but also severe malnutrition, dehydration, and signs of prolonged abuse that had been normalized in the house. Sylvia's autopsy catalogued extensive physical trauma, multiple bruises, contusions, lacerations, scalds, and burns. Records and court testimony lists roughly 150 cut marks, patterned burns consistent with deliberate application of heat, and abrasions where salt and other corrosives had been rubbed into wounds. What in the world? There was also signs of blunt force trauma and repeated beatings. The official cause of death included subdural hematoma and shock, which is the bleeding inside the brain, compounded by malnutrition and dehydration. The autopsy painted not a single event, but months of incremental brutality. Each act smaller than a murder in isolation, but together forming a pattern that eventually killed her. It's hard to hear these cases in details. In court, witnesses testified to an array of systematic rituals of humiliation and pain. Gertrude, the psycho, and her older children, notably Paula, enlisted neighborhood kids in the torment. They beat Sylvia with belts, broom handles, and a curtain rod. She was burned with cigarettes and matches. It seems that everyone around this poor girl just continuously tormented her. At times, she was forced into horrifying acts of SA that was reported in testimonies. One particularly grotesque punishment recorded in these testimonies involved Gertrude carving an insult into Sylvia's abdomen with a knife, while others forced her to hold still. There were documented instances where crackers were shoved in her mouth, where she was refused something as simple as water, where wounds were salted and rubbed to intensify pain, and one reported occasion to punish something horrible that happened to Sylvia. Gertrude made a very horrifying solution to that problem. I will not tell you guys. You do not need to know. An act of SA so depraved that during testimony everyone was left shocked and horrified to their core. Neighbor testimony confessions and courtroom exhibits, they all corroborated these acts. The forensic record, the infection, necrosis, healed and healing scars, they all matched the stories, which people started telling way too late. Their silence was absolutely crazy. Everyone failed this poor Sylvia girl in that whole town. This case is also about the community that did not intervene. Neighbors later admitted hearing cries and noticing the thin, sickly look Sylvia had the last months of her life. Others saw bruise marks. Many assumed someone else would act, so they didn't need to intervene. Some just rationalized it away in their head. They feared getting involved, and a cultural reluctance to invade a household, which back in the time was way more prevalent in a place like Indiana in the 60s, I'm sure. They just thought it's not my business. They must have this thing in their family that they torture each other. The story forces us to ask the very hard question about this bystander thing. Would you involve yourself? Would you at least, for God's sake, call the authority? But what if you do, and there's no sign immediate for the authorities to get involved? What then? What is the right decision to make? And how can we stop these terrifying things to keep happening? And isn't that the answer that people, the societies have had for centuries? After a highly publicized trial for this case in 1966, Gertrude Banisewski, did I spell his last name? Sounds Polish. Banisewski. Gertrude. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life. Paula, the daughter of Gertrude, she also received second-degree murder. There were other lesser terms, other people. As I said, many people got involved with torturing this poor girl. In the decades after, some of those lesser charged people were paroled case stayed in public memory as a cautionary tale of collective failure. Gertrude was released in 1985. Can you believe that? And it, of course, understandably so, sparked protests and outrage. Here I go once again. After reading all these things about Sylvia, I go to the page for Gertrude, and it turns out it's a woman. Oh wow, I should have known by the name, but I had no clue. So I'm really sorry about that mistake. So Gertrude Whiskey was a woman who with her older sister and basically the whole neighborhood tortured this little girl that was sold to them or paid money to so they could use as helps maybe. So after, no wonder they let her out because it was a female. They let her out on parole in 1985. That sparked protests and outrage. And Gertrude later died in 1990. The scars left by this crime extended beyond jail sentences. They changed. They caused legal reforms through social services and through the families and neighbors who'd watched a girl die. Something in a lot of people changed to do something when they see or hear something happening to another human being. Memorials and writings have tried to keep Sylvia's story from being reduced to some disgusting detail. And that's the end of that case. Both cases of tonight are monstrous, but they read differently to the mind. Matamoros was a public ceremonial violence tied into an organized crime, a ritualistic message sent by war. Sylvia Likens' death was domestic, incremental, built on neglect, and the local people were complicit. But that is all that I have to say about the cases of tonight. I hope this far into the video you're already asleep, because that is the point of my videos for the most part. If you wanted to fall asleep and you are, I hope that you are very lucid check out my other videos or check out my Patreon. I post all sorts of videos there. Today I posted an eating dinner ASMR video in which I had a bowl of homemade spaghetti and meat sauce.